Hi, my name is Camille Gomera Tavarez. I am an author, a graphic designer, creative from Northern New Jersey and the Dominican Republic. And I recently published my first book, which is called High Spirits. It's a short story collection, mostly based in the Dominican Republic around one family throughout different generations. And it has a little bit of magic in it, loosely based off of my father's side, which is from the border in Pedernales near Haiti. So yeah, I write and I do things, and that's who I am.
Wonderful. And I recently saw that High Spirits was published in English,
Mhm.
and it's published in Spanish.
Yeah.
So I have the English one. And can you tell me a little bit about the motivations of translating the book um, into Spanish?
Yeah, so the publisher that picked me up, which they actually just like plucked me out of nowhere. I didn't have any interest in publishing. I didn't know anything about publishing.
Oh, wow.
So it was just like my part of it was my thesis project in art school, where I minored in like creative writing. And so I just like made like a chapbook of like these stories that I had as like my creative writing thesis. And so it was like on my website, on my portfolio and stuff. And the editor, Nick, saw it there. They were like hiring more diverse like illustrators and designers, which is also what I do. And he was like, hey, that like project looks interesting. Like, can I read some of it? And then he ended up liking it and offering me a contract to make a book. So yeah. But yeah, they specialize. I mean, they're Latino owned and based in New Jersey and Hoboken. But they come from like Scholastic. It was like an imprint of Scholastic. And they mostly work on like stuff that is from different cultures and different languages. Their specialty being like translations. So they have like a special imprint called Ediciones that is translations of other books. They also just do translations of other people's work into English as well. So yeah. So it was always from the beginning, like in the contract. I mean, I told him and he was like, yeah, of course we're gonna do it in Spanish, but it was definitely agreed upon from the beginning that there was gonna be two versions. And yeah, and I really wanted to find someone that was like not just like, proper Spanish translator, because I had previously worked for the World Health Org, where I sometimes had to do translations. And a lot of the times they would say that I was incorrect or that like the words that I was using were not right. And it was really frustrating. And so I sort of had a little bit of insight into like how translations work a lot of the time. And it was very much not what I wanted the book to be. So when we found Lorraine Avila, who did the translation, she also wrote Malcriada, and she also after this got a contract with Living Creo to publish another YA book under them, which is coming I think next year. But yeah, it was like really cool because she's like from New York, and someone who was like from both cultures that could like, because there's like AAV in the book and stuff like that, was really cool and important. And she was sort of like, I don't know if I can do it, but like we sort of worked together, and like my mom helped a lot with the translation. And so at first she was like, this is not the proper, because she's a Spanish teacher, she was like, this isn't the proper word. And I'm like, yeah, but like how would you say it like if you were like with your friends and stuff? And
Right, right.
eventually he got like the point of like what I was trying to do. But yeah.
For people who don't know, everyone across Latin America, including the Caribbean, speaks Spanish differently. Punto y final. Like everyone talks differently. There's different words for different things. There's different expressions, and then there's different slangs and colloquial things, and even from like region to region in each country. And so there's this idea that formal Spanish is the Spanish that comes from Spain or is closest to the Spanish that comes from Spain, right? And Dominicans have gotten a rap for not knowing Spanish, for having bad Spanish, for having improper grammar, vaina, which vaina isn't even a word. It is a word, but it's not the word in the way that I'm using it, right? And like it's all this bullshit. And so I love that you were really cognizant of this when you're doing this translation of the book, working with a fellow, Black Latin American woman, Dominicana, who also, lived in New York, lives in New York back and forth and things like that. You didn't have the intentions of setting out to be an author.
No, I mean, I still kind of am like lost and I don't have an agent and stuff like that, but yeah.
And so this was found on your portfolio
Mhm.
from art school. So I want to start at art school. I think art school is kind of like a question mark for a lot of Black people, a lot of, Black Latin American people, like what is art school? Yeah, so what is art school, and kind of share a little bit of your experience about being in art school as a Black Latin American woman.
Yeah, so when I was like in high school, like I didn't really know what I wanted to do until like right before senior year. And I was just sort of like, because I was like a Tumblr person, like I would make GIFs and like edits and stuff of like, my favorite bands and people that I liked. And that was like my job. Like I clocked into work and like did that every day. But I sort of realized that like what I liked to do and when I like feel happiest is when I am doing stuff that involves technology. And like I was good at art like when I was younger, and writing and those things. So I sort of found that graphic design kind of was like a combination of all of those things. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna be a graphic designer, and I was like, I'm just gonna do that. And what do I need to do? Okay, I need to take an art class in high school. Okay, I need to like look for schools that have graphic design programs. And then it was like really late that like I sort of realized that like, oh, art schools exist, because I didn't really know that what they were like or
Yeah.
that they existed either. And then when I started applying to them and then like going to visit and stuff, I found that like a lot of the art school, well, the one that I ended up going to versus like a general like private college, they seemed more focused on like you getting a job, and like they were more like serious about like what you would do like after you graduated, versus when I saw them in like the arts programs within other schools, it seemed like they didn't have as many resources. And that like I think I asked once in like a tour, like, okay, when can I do like internships? And they were like, oh, don't worry about that. You won't have to worry about that till like junior, senior year. And I was just like, oh, that's weird, but okay. And I was like, I don't really have the time or the money to like do that. I gotta like get in and get out and get like what I need from this. So yeah, I ended up going to the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, which is a pretty top art school. It's like one of the top three.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah, so that was my experience there, and it was difficult. And it was difficult being like in a new place that wasn't like New York and New Jersey where I knew more about the culture and stuff. And I could see how like the Black students would drop out a lot more earlier than like everyone else, because it's a very particular environment. And I found, especially with like the reviews I've been getting for like the book and like art critiques and things like that, it's very similar to like in art school, where like when you would present stuff to like the class, which we had to do pretty much every day, that like you would sort of get this like weird reaction where it was either like silence or like nothing, or like overly like critical of like nitpicky stuff. And it was because they couldn't engage with like the content of whatever you were trying to do. So then you ended up like not getting the actual education that you were paying for, because people were capable of critiquing your work. But
Didn't
yeah,
have the depth. They didn't have the depth or the cultural context to receive the work. And it
it
sounds
was
like
we
instead
called
of
it the
like,
room of silence, because that's what would happen. It's like everyone else would get their thing, and then it get to you and they'd be like, oh, this looks nice or whatever, if you have like a Black person in it or something. And I was like, okay.
how did you stay motivated and like, in that type of environment?
I mean, like the first year, definitely I was like depressed and stuff. And I was like, I like ripped up all of my art pieces at the end of the year and like threw them in a fire. But like after that, I just started getting more involved in like the structure of the school, so that I could like make changes or like be a part of making changes for the school. And like by the time I got to senior year, it was like a completely different school in terms of like policies and stuff that they had, specifically with like diversity and things like that. Like I had my first like Latin teacher for like my thesis and things like that. But yeah, I was like a diversity coordinator. I was the president of the Latino Student Union, which was also interesting. Like, um, to for me to be like Afro Latina and like to be the president, and also I was like the Latino representative at the diversity office. Um, it was cool. Like senior year, there was like 5 like Dominican students. Now before that, I was just like alone, so I was just like, oh
Wow.
my god, all these kids are coming. And I was like, they're all my babies now. I have to like take them. But I feel like it was good for them to like see me in like that leadership role and like doing things like that so that they could see themselves involved as well. But yeah, one student like one time was like, after, I mean, they told someone else who then like told me that like apparently they felt like threatened or like I was judging them because of like the lightness of their skin. And I was like, they were Mexican. They were like, yeah, I feel like everyone's staring at me because I'm so pale and I don't look Latina. And I was like, girl, what are you talking? No one was paying attention to you.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Oh, yeah.
I
Went
never,
through a journey with my own identity, like just through doing that. But yeah.
yeah, no, that shout out to you for, I don't want to I don't want to just shout out to you for your strength and your resilience, right? Because you shouldn't have to go into a space always feeling like strong or having to be strong to move through it. But, shout out to you for creating spaces and avenues for people to feel safe, and to feel welcomed and to feel seen as well, in these types of institutions and places, because academia, whether it's art school or whether it's not art school, is a very isolating place for many of us, and like that's systemically how it's been designed and like all of those things. And so like shout out to you for being like, I'm gonna go to art school and then getting there and making changes and getting through it. Uh, yeah.
I don't know. I was like, I just have to finish the degree and get out of here. But yeah, I did learn a lot, and I soft spot in my heart for Baltimore and for Micah.
I am curious to hear a little bit more about the motivations behind the book. I know it was kind of like tucked away in your portfolio on your website, for your minor that you did in art school, but where did some of these motivations, and you touched on it a bit, your father's side of the family and like being a border town and all of that, but where do these characters come from? Where do these stories come from? And how did you flesh them out?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely fiction, but greatly influenced by my family and like stories. And like my process for writing it was mostly like taking a memory or like something that my mom would tell me, and then like just, getting the story out and then like finding ways to like sort of flesh it out within this world that I had. So a lot of it was I like sort of described it like, making a collage and like just putting layers and layers on top of it. Um, but yeah, a lot of it, especially from my dad's side, like the first story in the book called Sick Ball was the first story that I wrote and sort of helped me like get direction for it. But my dad would like get possessed as a child, and like my grandma would always talk about it. Looking back, he probably maybe had like, some sort of mental health thing going on or like autism somewhere on the spectrum. But back then it was just that he was possessed by some sort of devil, and my grandma would talk to me about how she like exorcised it from him like on the table and all this stuff. Basically he would just like space out and like just like walk and walk and walk, and like not know where he was going. So we have the main character sort of having a similar affliction in that first story, and I just sort of like wondered like if there's a person like this, then like what is triggering all of this, like what how does it look like when they're in that state? And I sort of started asking questions about, how I could sort of flesh it out as like a more full story. And then, yeah, it just sort of went from there. And then I started took from my life and my grandmother and my grandfather who passed away after my grandmother already had passed away when I started writing the book, and then like by the time I finished my grandfather passed away. So I was just thinking a lot about them and that side of the family.
Yeah, and there are definitely grandparents in here. And Yeah, I have been reading it slowly throughout the summer. I've been enjoying it so far. I'm not done yet, so I definitely don't want you to like, spoil anything in the book. But if there is one thing that you would like people to take away from the book, what would that be?
Interesting. I don't think anyone's asked me that before, but yeah, I don't know. I think just it's like a very like I guess personal thing of like just like documenting family stories and things like that. I think the main like thread throughout the book is like toxic masculinity, and like for each story I was just like, how is toxic masculinity going to show up here? And like even there's a story that just has two girls, but like I was like, how can it like still show up in that way as well, because it's everywhere, it's like prevalent everywhere. So I was just trying to find like the different sort of faces of it and like how it just shows up in everyday lives. But definitely for sure, like the way that it specifically shows up in Latin America and Dominican Republic, even though we're like a matriarchal society, the ways that it's still very like conservative and masculine being like the top thing that you can be. And I think a lot of it came from like I was in a class about like magical realism, and that was like one of the greatest like classes that I took, and the teacher was awesome. But there was like one story, and I was like, oh, this is in like the 40s, but it's like about a father who like pushes his son off a cliff to like teach him how to swim and stuff. And I was like, that's some shit my dad would do. Like I just like connected to like the story and that kind of stuff a lot. So it was sort of thinking of the ways that like we raise like boys differently, and like this hardness that like you sort of have with them, especially if like they're black. Like there's like a story in like a barber shop, and like the way that hair sort of plays into it, as well as like the just the way that you're supposed to like present yourself as a man in that society, and how that can like mentally not be well for you. But yeah, I know like some people are like, is it hard to write like from a boy's perspective or from a man's perspective? For me, it's not really, because gender doesn't exist. And I was like, I'm more in between. So I feel like I can relate to my male characters as much as the female ones. But yeah.
I want to get to the graphic design of you, right? I, I cannot get over how dope it is that someone was just like perusing the internet and in the corner of your website was like, oh shit, this is really dope writing. And now you have a whole ass book in English and Spanish. I think that's amazing. But you are a graphic designer. Um, so talk to me a little bit about, what does that mean and what type of projects do you enjoy working on?
Yeah, so I guess what it means is that I mean, it's not just like digital. I'm like on the computer. Like in art school, especially the first year, we tend to do things more like analogly, and you have to sort of like build your way up. And even like doing like letterpress and things like that were things that I was interested in, and that I worked on for my thesis project. But yeah, I always liked working with my hands. But things that have to do with type or like graphics, like logos and stuff for businesses. I also design websites. Currently I work for like an agency that mostly does like progressive political campaigns for like Ilhan Omar, Cory Booker, United We Dream, organizations like that. So yeah, I spend my day to day doing that, and then like by nighttime I try to to write. But yeah, that's what I do.
Wonderful. What would be your ideal, and it doesn't have to be graphic design or writing or whatever, what would be like your ideal piece of art to create? Yeah, what would that ideal piece of art be?
It's a great philosophical life question. I don't know. What would be your, you know, um, ideal art project? I guess like I'm constantly looking for something that like combines like my writing with like my graphic design, which lately has been like, a magazine would be like I guess the preferred way, but trying to like think of like different ways that they could also like just be together. I did like in the pandemic start a magazine for Black immigrant writers, because again, like you were saying before, it was hard to find places to submit work to that would accept it. So I kind of just wanted to be like, oh, does anyone need like a credit for them? I can just like make a website because that's what I do. And then you can have a credit that you've published something. So yeah, probably something similar to that if I can, get the time to dedicate to it for sure.
Wonderful. Do you have any words of advice or wisdom for other, Black Latin Americans, young Black folks who are creatives and needing some words of encouragement?
No, I mean, I'm only 25, some baby goo goo gaga, so I don't have wise words. But I guess just like whatever it is that you want in life, know that it's like possible to like do it. I feel like that's the biggest thing I got from art school from the beginning was just that like if we had an idea for something, like if I wanted like a flying dog or something that seemed impossible, like there's always a practical way to actually make that thing that you're visualizing in your head actually come to reality. And it was nice to have the support and the resources to make that happen, but I feel like that's applicable to like anything in anyone's life. So yeah.
Wonderful. And where can people find you and your work and all the things that you're creating and doing on the internet?
All right, you can find me at Camille Gomera Tavarez, I think on Twitter and Instagram. My website is cgtdesign.net. And yeah, that's it. Yeah, and also I love your like videos and stuff. They've been very I took like a class with Dash in the winter and she like recommended your videos. So then I just started going through all of them and learning things.
That's so great to hear that. I appreciate that. And shout out to you for having this like creating, leaving spaces better than how you entered them. And slash creating spaces for that to happen, whether it's we gonna create a whole ass magazine so you can get a credit, or becoming the president of one of the top 3 art schools in the country to make sure that spaces are more welcoming. That's really amazing, especially from a baby, which I don't think you're a baby, but as a young person, and just I think that's really dope. So thank you.
Thank you.